Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilman is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are my reviews of the new arena cards that are going to be added into the arena sometime in the future. Now, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, at this year's BlizzCon, Blizzard revealed 27 potential cards that they were going to just dump into the arena outside of the confines of an expansion. Just a little bonus set of 9 cards, and they left it up to the BlizzCon audience to select from that pool of 27 the actual 9 cards, one for each class, that they would review and balance and then add into the arena, which is a really cool idea. It's neat to see some extra cards that are just sort of completely bonus, they don't exist within an expansion, being added into the game. That's really cool. That can bring some new life to the arena and cause some major balance swings and just make things more fun and more exciting as always. So what I'd like to do is talk about all 27 of the cards that they walked through, reviewing each of them and their potential influence, focusing most primarily, of course, on the cards that were actually selected to be put into the game, but also discussing some of the potential ramifications of the other cards had they been chosen instead. All that said, of course, there are 27 cards here, and I don't want to take too long in this review, so I'll try to move through these a little faster than I normally do in regards to the discussion side of things. But all that said, let's go ahead and jump into these cards. Starting off first, we have the 3 Hunter cards that were included as potential possibilities for the arena. And up first, I should just note that Deadeye was the card that was selected by the audience. You'll see it over there on the right side of the screen as the one that Blizzard's actually going to take, tweak, and include in the new arena card set. But up first, let's talk about Reload real quickly. This is a 2-mana spell that allows you to discard your hand and draw 3 cards. I think this one's pretty cool. First off, Hunter needs card draw all the time, so just a raw card draw card like this one's neat. Now, of course, you are discarding your hand, so there's potential drawbacks, but it allows you to trade up from like a weak hand into a potentially better hand, which is cool in an arena. You know, if you have just a couple 1s and 2 drops late in the arena, trading those into 5 and 6 and 7 mana cards can be amazing. Not to mention the fact, of course, that if your hand is empty, which can also happen often in an arena, you're just going to draw 3 cards for 2 mana, which is totally absurd. Leaves you 8 mana to do a ton of things, and that's fantastic. Up next, the 4-mana card there is Volley, another spell that adds 3 random shot spells to your hand, and that means things like Arcane Shot and Explosive Shot and Multi-Shot, and there might be a couple others. But you just get 3 of those randomly added to your hand, so sort of like a Kabbalist Tome in a sense, but Hunter spells specifically of the shot variety. And this is another card draw, card dump, card generation kind of card. Unfortunately for this one, I think it's a little worse than Reload, simply because the kinds of cards you're getting are very specific sort of cards, so they may not always fit what you're trying to do in your gameplay. And like if you're ahead and you're trying to cement the board, often these volley cards wouldn't help. They're much better if you're behind and trying to make a comeback. Not to mention that you could just get 3 low value cards like 3 Arcane Shots, and that would suck. And finally, this is a 4-mana spell, so you're not going to have that much mana left over in the turn you cast it to actually do much, so a much worse card to me than Reload. And then finally, we have the card that's actually going to be put into the arena, which is Deadeye, a 2-mana spell. For the rest of your game, your hero power can also target minions. So this is basically the Steam Weedle sniper card we saw a long time ago in Hearthstone, but instead it's a spell and a permanent effect instead of a minion that has to live on board in order to activate that effect. And this is just incredibly strong, okay? A ping in arena is amazing. The Hunter hero power in arena is often rather weak because it doesn't commit to the board, and for the ability to spend only 2 mana to get a upgraded ping for the rest of the game, that is absurd. It's better than Mage's ping. It will hit so many things, kill so many things. It's just a consistent resource that's going to provide a ton of value over the course of an arena game. So Deadeye looks incredibly strong to me. If you compare it to something like Shadow Form, for instance, it's just going to be strictly better. So here you go, Deadeye, amazing card. In fact, if they do balance this one, I think they're going to have to tweak it up to 3 mana to bring it more in line with something like Shadow Form, because otherwise it might just be too good in arena. But nonetheless, an amazingly designed and fantastically powerful card. So now let's move on to 3 warrior weapons, which were included as potential arena cards. And of course, Blazing Longsword is a note there. The glowing one was the one that was actually selected to be included in the arena. But let's start off with Training Blade here on the left. This is a new 1-mana weapon. It's a 1/3 with a Death Rattle. Add a random weapon to your hand. Now, like Blizzard talked about in the panel, I really like the theme of this one, where you start out with kind of a weak practice sword, but when you're done using that practice sword, you get this awesome cool new sword added to your hand, or at least a cool new weapon added to your hand. And that's a really cool thematic kind of fun thing. Not to mention, just having 3 pings early in the game in Arena can be a huge deal for setting up trades and contesting your opponent's board. But the ability to not waste a card draw in your deck and still be able to run this and get another weapon back is really fantastic. Training Blade looks like it would be a great card in Arena. Moving on to the Axe of the Eclipse, a 5-mana weapon. It's a 4/2 with a battle cry, destroy all damaged minions. This is another card with just a ridiculously powerful effect that could be completely absurd in Arena. Now, there's not necessarily a ton of whirlwind effects in Arena, but just being able to trade in small stuff into bigger things, even if you just killed one minion that was medium-sized with Axe of the Eclipse, it's going to be a fantastic value payoff, because a card like Arcanite Reaper is already strong as a 5/2. This only loses 1 attack, and you get this huge upside of killing or essentially executing a minion. That's really good. Now, of course, there's the risk that you kill your own stuff from time to time, but you control that risk, so you'll often be able to play this in a favorable board state. And, of course, if you hit 3 or 4 minions, the value is just off the charts. That's totally brokenly good. Now, finally, the card that was actually picked is Blazing Longsword, a 3-mana, 2/3 weapon that also damages the minions next to whomever you attack. So this is essentially an effect we've seen multiple times in the past in Hearthstone, but never really took off. Most recently, of course, it's from Scourgelord Garrosh and his weapon. The Warrior DK has a very similar effect that does see some play and is, in fact, quite strong. For me, the problem with Blazing Longsword is that it's only a 2-attack weapon. So there's not going to be that many instances where this lines up perfectly. With the Warrior DK as a 4-attack weapon, that kills a lot more things, and you can use it to trade up into bigger stuff. Hit that 1/1 to kill the 4/4. That's really favorable. Hitting a 1/1 now only damages a 4/4 for 2 with Blazing Longsword. That seems less exciting to me. So unless you have some sort of weapon buff on Blazing Longsword, it just doesn't seem like it's going to be that high impact for me. Yes, it's 3 2-damage pings, essentially, which is fine in Arena, and occasionally it's going to roll a little higher. This is a good card, don't get me wrong. It's a strong Arena card, but I don't actually know that it's better than these other 2 options. It might not be the one that I personally would have picked, although I do like this mechanic. If this was a 3/3 or even a 3/2, I think this would be a lot stronger card. If it was a 4-mana 4/2, it would be really, really good. As it stands, still a good card. Warriors will want to pick this in Arena. It'll be better than a vast majority of their other options because Warrior doesn't have that many good picks. That said, still not as good as the other 2 as far as I'm concerned. So now let's move on to the Warlock cards. The leftmost card here, Bottled Madness, was actually the one that was selected by the audience to be included. So let's start off with it. Bottled Madness is a 0-mana spell that transforms each card in your hand into a random demon. So sort of this Renounce Darkness kind of effect almost, but instead it just transforms all your stuff into demons, most of which will already be Warlock cards, so a little different there, but still a card that just says, hey, I've got all this stuff, I'm just going to sacrifice it and turn all my stuff into other stuff and just pray that that works out. And most of the time it probably will, because demons on average are solid cards. At the very least, they have good stats. Of course, they do have downsides. But if you play this in a situation where you know you have a bunch of junk in your hand, whether it just be weird synergy spells or cards that you had to pick in Arena that sucked, being able to turn those into Doom cards and even Flame Imps, Voidwalkers, etc., most of the time will be a trade up. So I think this will be a good card in Arena. It's not just sort of a gimmicky, fun card. I also think it's actually going to be rather strong. Alternatively, the other cards that were up were From Beyond, a 1-mana spell that draws 3 cards, and then at the end of your turn, you discard them. I think this is a really cool effect. You kind of have to just go all in on this one and say, I'm really going to hope I top deck this thing I need or some playable cards. And it's worth it, right? It makes sense because you're only giving up 1 mana in order to do that. And discarding things that you didn't have already anyway isn't that big of a downside. So even if you just draw 1 card and it's something you really need, you play it, you discard the other 2 things. Who cares? It's likely not going to go to fatigue 90% of the time in Arena games anyway, so you're not really sacrificing anything. You're just drawing cards, giving yourself options, and occasionally you're going to draw 3 fantastic cards that do fit in your curve, and that's going to be a really, really strong play. So I like From Beyond, another strong card, maybe even better than Bottled Madness, in fact. And then finally we have Combust, a 6-mana spell that allows you to destroy a minion and then deal 3 damage to all other minions. So it's sort of like a Siphon Soul and a Hellfire had a baby. Oh, this is actually deal 3 damage to all of their characters. Excuse me, I think I misread there. Either way, it's just like Hellfire and Siphon Soul had a baby, but only for 6 mana, which is a lot of value packed into a single card. This thing would be nutty removal in Arena. Hellfire is already solid, of course. Any sort of single target removal is already really good as well. Doesn't quite have the heal of Siphon Soul, so it's a little riskier, of course, because you are just damaging yourself. But who cares? It's still just a ton of value. This would be a very, very powerful Arena card. Maybe even too powerful, in fact. So I'm kind of glad that the audience went for Bottled Madness. I think that's still a strong card with a little more flavor and a little more fun than these other two options, although all three of these would definitely be mighty good inclusions in Arena. So now let's move on to Shaman cards, and here Crackling Doom, the rightmost card, was selected by the audience, which is incredibly scary, but we'll get there. First, let's start off with Refreshing Jolt, a 3-mana spell that deals 4 damage to an enemy or restores 8 health to a friendly character, and that's an incredibly powerful card. First off, even if it didn't have any health aspects, Refreshing Jolt would be amazing. Just a 3 damage, deal 4 is really, really good. That compares favorably to things like Jade Lightning. It's just a good single target Shadow Bolt kind of card. Shadow Bolt's great in Arena as well. So Refreshing Jolt would be good just on that regard. But also the flexibility here. It's almost like a Druid card in a way. Being able to heal things is also really good because sometimes you might not need the damage and you might need a little bit of recovery. So you can either heal a minion or your face to stay alive, and that's just very powerful. An amazing amount of flexibility like that will take a card like Refreshing Jolt really far, so this would undoubtedly be a good card in the Arena. Up next, we have Magma Shock, a 4-mana spell that allows you to silence a minion and then deal 4 damage to it. So very similar to Refreshing Jolt in a lot of ways, or a Jade Lightning kind of card, but also an upgraded version of Earth Shock. That's why the name Magma Shock, no doubt, is there. And another just unbelievably good card. First off, silences can be powerful in Arena always, and the ability to silence and likely kill the target at the same time, super valuable. Even if it doesn't kill it outright, just sets up trades. Really good card against especially things like Spike Ridge Steed and all the other really powerful buff sorts of cards in the game. Magma Shock would be an amazing inclusion in Arena. But then finally we have Crackling Doom, the card that got picked. And this is just absolutely insane. It's a 0-mana spell that deals 12 damage to all minions. So it kills pretty much everything in the game except, a few edge cases like the Ultrasaurs and the Ancient Ones of the world. But of course, you're also going to be unable to do anything the next turn unless you combo this with exactly Eternal Sentinel, I think, is the only card currently in standard format that reduces your overload cost. So, a big risk kind of card, but also just an unbelievable tempo card, right? Usually with cards that remove the entire board, things like, even Volcano or Twisting Nether, more specifically for Warlock, you don't have much mana left over to sort of swing back, okay? And Volcano, of course, doesn't always clear the board. But with Crackling Doom, you're going to clear the board, and you're going to have 10 mana, or up to 10 mana remaining, to actually still play stuff. Now, you sacrifice a turn in the future, but you're going to have one heck of a turn right now, and that is probably a little bit too good, because the likelihood of your opponent being able to swing back in their favor over a single turn might just be too low, because you just get so much damage on board and so much initiative that it's often going to be worth sacrificing an entire turn. Not to mention that when you cast this on turn 5, for instance, you're not really overloading for 10, you're kind of just overloading for 6 the following turns. You're not really sacrificing quite as much mana, you're just still sacrificing a turn, but a smaller turn of that. So the earlier in the game you're able to play Crackling Doom, perhaps the better it can be. And of course, there are some ridiculous combos here with things like Snow Fury Giants, for instance, where you can just overload for a bunch and play a ton of Snow Fury Giants. So that's a possible horrifying scenario that's unlikely, but could still just win people games right off the bat. And that's maybe a little bit too good. So Crackling Doom, I think it's pretty good. It's one of those cards where it could just fail a lot, just depending on the deck and depending on the run and the opponents and everything else. But it has the potential to be completely broken, and I think Blizzard's going to have to take a really close look at this one before they do release it in the Arena, lest they put in a card that can just completely make Shaman overpowered. But we'll have to see where they land on Crackling Doom. It's certainly strong, but a little scary at the same time, and I'm incredibly curious to see how this one pans out. So up next we have some rogue cards, the middle of which was selected by the audience to be included, Smoke Bomb. But first let's start off with Assassin's Training, a new 1-mana spell that allows you to give a minion poisonous. And we've seen in the past that giving minions poisonous with things like Plague Scientist, for instance, can be very, very powerful for Rogue. Rogue already has a ton of removal, so I have no doubt that Assassin's Training would be good. It's just another removal kind of card. I'm not sure it'd be better than Plague Scientist, by the way, because you're committing a little more to the card in your deck. In other words, you're not also getting a body attached to it, so you're kind of, it's a weaker spell in a lot of ways, or at least a weaker board contribution than something like Plague Scientist. So not quite as good as some of the other options Rogue already has, but would still be a good card to draft often. Moving on to the second card here, Smoke Bomb, the one that was actually picked. This is another 1-mana spell that's really cool. This one allows you to give a minion stealth until your next turn, and you also draw a card. So in the vein of things like Power Word Shield, where you're doing something to your minion and cycling a card for 1 mana, that is incredibly good. Just being able to cycle a card for 1 mana isn't bad in the first place, right? Particularly with Rogue, who can activate combos and utilize spell synergies a lot of the time. But giving a minion stealth is also super powerful. Of course, you can imagine all kinds of friendly minions that benefit from giving stealth, just setting up some damage that your opponent can't remove, or some sort of value minion that's going to just draw a ton of cards, or whatever it might be. There's just a million great ways to do that. But there's another interaction with this card. It just says a minion, not a friendly minion. So you can actually give opposing minions stealth if they have taunt, and you can ignore them. So you can essentially kind of just ignore a taunt for a turn and just go face for the kill or make value trades or whatever you need to do. So an incredibly flexible card. And I think once Blizzard takes a closer look at this one and tweaks it before they put it into the game, I have a feeling it'll say give a friendly minion stealth, because I don't think they want you giving enemy taunt minions stealth. I don't think that was an intention in this design, so I think that'll change. But nonetheless, either way, with the taunt, stealth, enemy minion thing, it's going to be incredible. Without it, it will still be a good and playable card and a draftable card that people will want to run. So finally, we have a new weapon here for Rogue, Mind Spike, a 4-mana weapon. Whenever you kill a minion with this, draw a card. I think this one's just a little bit too slow and a little bit too much of a commitment to card advantage as opposed to tempo for a class like Rogue, which particularly benefits from tempo a lot of the times because they just have so many big tempo swing kinds of cards. In other words, you're going to be able to kill minions occasionally with this, but not all the time. So it's going to take you at least 3 turns to draw 3 cards. So it's slow in that regard, but also it's just 4 mana that's not really influencing the board all that much when you could just cast a hero power and get the same kind of ping while playing other cards, while developing other things. So this one feels like it'd be a rather weak weapon. I like the design of it. It might be a little better and constructed. It certainly does some interesting things with weapon buffs as a base for weapon buffs, but of course, if you build an arena deck too specifically for any given synergy, it tends to weaken itself a little bit. So, going all in on a Mind Spike style card and hoping to hit weapon buffs would be pretty risky, because otherwise it's slowing down your deck a lot. And still, it's a pretty big mana commitment. So I don't really think Mind Spike would be too influential in the arena, and I'm glad this one wasn't picked. Moving on to the Priest cards. The rightmost card, Generous Spirit, was the one selected, but let's start off talking about Absolution, a new 1-mana spell that gives a minion +1/+1 and lifesteal. This feels like just a little bit of a throwaway card to me. It would be okay at best. It's a pretty weak buff and a pretty small influence for a card in your deck, and of course the lifesteal would only rarely matter. Now, you could give that +1/+1 to like an 8/8 and heal for a ton. Occasionally that would be good, but a lot of the time this would just be a dead card in your hand and wouldn't contribute much, particularly in the early game, to the board. So I have a feeling like Absolution, because a little bit of its value is tied into that lifesteal, as opposed to something like Divine Strength, where you just buff the minion a little more and it enables you to control the board more effectively in the early game, probably makes it a weaker card. I just don't see Absolution looking that strong in Arena, but hey, it wasn't picked anyway, so who cares? Moving on to Mass Resurrection at the 5-mana spot here. This is a new spell that gives your minions Death Rattle, re-summon this minion. So Mass Resurrection, by definition to me, is just absolutely a win more card. This is a terrible card when you're behind in the game, because, if you have, a minion out there essentially, and you got like 8 mana or something, you're not going to be able to like play multiple things and cast Mass Resurrection in the same turn. Or if you have no minions out there, you could maybe play a 5-drop and Mass Resurrection. that's not a very good turn. So this really only becomes powerful when you already have 3 or 4 or 5 minions on the board and you're able to cast it and maybe even commit 1 more minion extra, and then suddenly you have a really defensible position. And in that case, you were already winning the game really hard anyway, so you didn't necessarily need a card like Mass Resurrection. It only helps you when you're already super ahead, a win more card, and that's why I don't think it'd really be all that strong in Priest, even though Priest in a lot of ways is already a win more kind of class thanks to its hero power, which gets the most value when you're ahead on board and able to dictate smart trades. They don't need extra win more cards like Mass Resurrection. And then finally we have the Generous Spirit. This is a super cool little card. A 3-mana spell that allows you to give a friendly minion to your opponent, and then you get to draw 3 cards after you have done that. So essentially, 3 cards for 3 mana would be really, really hyper efficient. That's more than you're normally allowed. Just look at things like Arcane Intellect. Normally you get 2 cards for 3 mana. So Generous Spirit says, hey, I'm going to have a little trade-off. Like, I have to give something of value to my opponent in order to get that extra card. So most of the time, that's probably not going to be worth it. You often don't want to sacrifice board presence and on-board value with initiative for the potential for value in the future in Arena. Arena is really board-centric and tempo-centric. So, if you have a 5/5, you never want to give away a 5/5 in order to draw an extra card. That would be absolutely terrible. That'd be a miserable decision. But of course, there are shenanigans that could be afoot. There are all kinds of cards with downsides in Arena, like negative death rattle effects and all sorts of things, that giving them to your opponent could be really, really good, and sometimes you could benefit from that. You could also just give them like a 1/1, and that's not as much of a sacrifice for drawing an extra card. So there is some potential here with Generous Spirit. It's one of those cards where it'll often be a dead card in your hand, but occasionally it'll line up really nicely and give you a good out near the end of an Arena game when you're looking to refill your hand, looking to continue applying pressure by accruing additional resources. So I think Generous Spirit is far too specific in its uses and requires too many great turn opportunities that just aren't going to exist that much. So I don't think this will necessarily be a good Arena card, but it certainly is a fun and interesting design, and I kind of hope it gets played from time to time just because of the shenanigans that I always call them that will be afoot, and we can enjoy that experience together. So now let's move on to the Paladin cards, although there's really not much to discuss here because these all kind of suck. Hand of Salvation over there on the right was the card that was selected by the audience, but frankly I don't think any of these are going to be very good. Up first we have Retribution, a new 1-mana secret. When an enemy attacks your hero, deal 4 damage to it. So in a lot of ways this is kind of like Noble Sacrifice, right? Because Noble Sacrifice is whenever something attacks, you deal 2 damage to it. But it's a little more specific because it's only when something attacks your hero. So you kind of cut in half how often it triggers. But you do double the damage, essentially, of it as well because it's dealing 4 instead of 2. The problem for me with this card is it's just how often is this going to work successfully? It's super easy to play around. Your opponent can either use their face. If they have a weapon, they can use small minions to trade in. It's just not that good of a defensive tool, and they can also just, of course, trade things into your board if they know you're likely to have Retribution up. So it's one of those things that's easy to play around, it's easy to test, it's easy to punish it, and of course, secrets just aren't good in Arena as a draftable kind of card. They're fine when they come off Hydrologist. This would be fine off of Hydrologist from time to time, but you don't want to draft Arena cards, or you don't want to draft secrets in Arena because they're just so weak, they don't contribute enough. They take up a spot in your deck, they cost you a draw for a very low impact kind of card. So Retribution, for that reason alone, looks terrible, and even as a secret, I don't really think its effect is all that strong either. Moving on to Relic of Hope, a new 0-mana spell that was denied, thankfully. This one reads, when you draw this, transform it into a random Paladin spell. The problem there, of course, is that many of the Paladin spells are secrets, and as I just described, secrets just aren't that strong in Arena, so often this thing's going to fail. Occasionally, yes, it'll hit a giant dino size, and that will be cool, but the only time you'd want to take Relic of Hope in your draft is if you had 2 other really terrible cards next to it, right? Normally, you'd take the more consistent, predictable, guaranteed kind of value sort of card so that you're not risking drawing a secret and just wasting another card slot in your list. And then finally, hey, another secret! It's Hand of Salvation. A lot of the same problems apply, just a very low impact kind of card. I do like the design of Hand of Salvation here. It does read, when your second minion dies in a turn, revive it. So it's a lot like Redemption, but it's essentially It gives your opponent a little puzzle. If they know both Hand of Salvation and Redemption exist, suddenly they have dilemmas. Like, what minion do they kill first? You can sort of play around and punish your opponents in that way. But again, just not strong enough to run on its own. You wouldn't pick this in a draft. It's going to be fine off Hydrologist. It could make some funny, interesting plays there. It's cool that it would exist, but not a fundamentally powerful arena card in any sense of the word in my mind. So all three of these, unfortunately, are rather weak. So up next, let's move on to Mage. The middle card here, Polymorph, question mark, question mark, question mark, or as I like to call it, Polymorph? It was the card picked by the BlizzCon audience, so that's the one we're going to be seeing in Arena. But let's start off with Arcane Flux, a 2-mana spell that reads, cast a random mage spell, targets chosen randomly, and draw a card. So this is sort of like your Servant of Yogg-Saron, or even Yogg-Saron himself, but in a spell format. And that's a really big risk, right? I mean, yes, Arcane Flux can high roll like mad, and you can Pyroblast your opponent's face, or Polymorph the Tyrian, or do all kinds of fantastical things. But there's also a lot of times you're going to kill your own stuff, just fireball your own face. It's just too random, right? And you do get to draw a card, which is cool, but at what cost? I think Arcane Flux would just be too inconsistent to be good in Arena most of the time. It'd be one of those cards that you'd have to take sometimes because you had two other terrible choices, but it would hurt your deck just as much as it would help it, and that's not necessarily a good thing in Arena, where consistent smart play can often push you ahead of your opponents. So moving on to the actual card that was selected, Polymorph. The 5-mana spell says, choose a minion, discover a new minion to transform it into. Now this is crazy, right? It's, first off, hilarious artwork. It's like a frog and a sheep combined, so it's like Hex and Polymorph had a baby. But the effect here, I just don't like it very much. So let me try to explain this as best I can. So there's basically two outcomes you're looking for here, right? First off, you want to turn something of your opponent's into something terrible, right? Like the normal Polymorph effect. You want to take their Tyrian and turn it into a 1/1. The problem there with this Polymorph card is that a random minion, when you discover it, is never, almost never going to be as bad as a 1/1. So often the worst case scenario might be a 2-mana or 3-mana card, and you might have to give them, say, like an Acolyte of Pain or a Wolf Rider or something, right? Something that's a little bit better than a sheep. So not only does it cost an extra mana in that scenario than a normal Polymorph, but you're also giving them a better thing. And that's not as good as the removal card. It's far less consistent and far riskier, and occasionally they might just get 3 more 8-drops when you try to turn their Tyrian into a card, so there's a bundle of risk associated with it in that direction as well. So the other alternative is taking something small of yours and turning it into something big, because you can take your 1/1 Wisp and you can turn it into a Tyrian. The problem there, of course, is that the average minion you discover, since it's in just a giant pool of minions, isn't very good. And the cost is also randomly distributed, but there are more low-cost cards than high-cost cards. So you're most likely to hit just like a random 3 or 4 mana card, and you will rarely ever see a high-impact legendary. So most of the time, if you're trying to take your small thing and make it big, it's still going to backfire. It's still going to fail. The instances where this card works exactly the way you want it to in both directions are incredibly slim. They're so unlikely. The instances where it does something very just middling and low impact are much, much larger. So you're going to run into those 80% of the time or something where it didn't do what you wanted it to do, and that lack of consistency and the super risk and the unpredictability, they make this card a lot of fun, but I don't think they make it very good on average. It's just going to backfire more than it actually works. So then let's move on to the final card here. It's called Power Cosmic, a 1-mana spell that allows you to discover a legendary minion. And this is a cool card. This is basically, you're paying 1 mana to redraft this card, but you're redrafting it in a legendary instead of whatever common quality this card might be otherwise. And normally when you get a legendary in your arena draft, you're pretty happy to see that, and I'd say a lot of people would pay 1 mana to get an extra legendary added to their deck, so Power Cosmic's going to be good. Yes, there will be instances you get the Pagel Lorewalker Cho set and you get a terrible card, but it's still worth it for the opportunity to get something very powerful. So Power Cosmic would have been a very strong arena card and the strongest of these three in my mind. But we're stuck with polymorph question mark, question mark, question mark instead. So I'm curious to see how that shakes out. All the same, 3 really interesting designs that are exciting to see. And now finally we have the Druid cards. The third one there, Nature's Champion, was the one selected by the audience, so it'll be the one we see in Arena. But let's start off with Thorn Strike, the 2-mana spell here. This is another choose 1 card. You can deal 2 damage to a minion or 1 damage to all enemy minions. So this is sort of an Arcane Blast and a Whirlwind tied together, and I think this would be a totally fine Arena card. There's nothing too surprising or crazy about it. First off, though, flexibility is good. AoE is good. Even Whirlwind AoE is really strong in Arena, and this would be a fairly cheap one. Not as cheap as Whirlwind, but cheaper than things like Fan of Knives, for instance. So it also doesn't damage your own stuff. It's just enemy minions. So that's an upside there on Thorn Strike as well. And occasionally just having that 2 damage ping is also really good. So I think Thorn Strike would be one of those solid Arena cards that would often really improve the overall quality of your deck. Moving on to Boon of Elune. This is a 5-mana spell that allows you to add 4 Moonfires to your hand. So you're paying 5 mana to get 0 total mana back in value. Not quite. You're basically paying 5 mana to get a 4 damage total spell that can be allocated in different amounts at any given different time. And that's actually not that bad, right? Like, you could just send all 4 Moonfires to a single minion and kill it, and then this is like a little bit higher costed, like Shadow Bolt, right? Alternatively, you could ping 4 different things and kill each of them at 1 health, and then it's a really expensive Whirlwind. So it never looks quite as good as a card like Thorn Strike to me because it's just so expensive. But if you start to add in spell damage, suddenly Boon of Elune looks a lot better. Of course, unfortunately, spell damage is really inconsistent to draw and work with in Arena. You never get the cards at the same time you need them. So that's not really an upside here. There are also other sort of synergies that are possible, like Gadgetzan Auctioneer and spell synergies. But again, those are really hard to work with. So ultimately, Boon of Elune, a fun design. Maybe not just fundamentally awful, but certainly not very good. In my mind, I think this card would be on the weaker side of things in Arena. So now let's move on to the final card of this review. It's Nature's Champion, a 3-mana spell. And this one's really crazy. This is something we haven't seen a lot before. This allows you to return a friendly minion to your hand, and then you also give it +5/+5. So it's actually kind of a hand buff card in a lot of ways, right? Because you could take a minion that was out of the board, give it a ton of extra stats, and then replay it. The question is, in what instances are you going to want to use something like Nature's Champion? I think it looks fundamentally the most strong on minions with strong battle cries, for instance. If you have a really good battle cry you want to utilize multiple times, this allows you to essentially Youthful Brewmaster it, but make it a really powerful card the second time around. Also, of course, Druid just has a lot of sort of choose 1 effects, and those normally aren't directly impactful, but just to even, imagine something like Keeper of the Grove, for instance. You use it to get the silence, maybe it lives the turn, you hit your opponent's face with it for a little 2 extra damage, and then you pull it back in your hand, and now you have a 7-mana 7/7 that silences a minion. That's actually a pretty good minion, right? That's really cool. And there are a handful of different options there, and neutral cards as well, that could be pretty insane with this. So the one downside, of course, for it is it's a little bit of a punishing tempo kind of card. You're spending 3 mana to take something off the board and then have to spend the mana again to play it. So I don't know that it would always be perfect just because you're sacrificing a lot of tempo and a lot of board presence. So the battle cry, or however you utilize these stats, maybe use them to heal a minion in the late game, however you utilize it, is going to have to be very powerful in order to make Nature's Champion good, because it is fundamentally a little bit of a slower card in regards to tempo. That said, I still think there are certain decks and certain cards that benefit this one a lot, and just big stats sometimes can help, and 5/5 for 3 mana is a lot of stats in Arena, so Nature's Champion does seem like the kind of card that could be good. And there you have it, folks. That's 27 cards. Man, I think I took longer than I wanted to talk through all those, but still I tried to hurry and tried to move through them pretty quickly. It's really interesting to just get some extra insights into Blizzard's design space and what they're thinking about and some of the options. There were no minions here, you'll note. These are all spells and weapons, so I don't think they want to take up minion design. I think they just have so many ideas for spells. This stuff is spilling over, and they want to add some fun into Arena, so it's a really cool thing they've done here. I'm excited. I think some of these cards are scary, so I'm curious how they balance them, as they said they're going to go take these and balance them and make sure they work and all that fun stuff. I'm very excited to see how that turns out. But I'm curious also, what do you guys think about these cards? Which ones do you think are going to be the strongest? Which ones are going to be the worst? Which ones did I overestimate or underestimate? Share all those thoughts in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.